And now we begin our reading on page 45. Canada since 1945, Part 1. Canada and economic growth. During the 1930s, life was difficult in Canada and in many other countries around the world. This was the time of the Great Depression. All across the world, businesses failed and many people lost their jobs. They were not able to support themselves or their families. Many governments tried to make conditions better for their citizens by restricting trade with other countries. However, this made things worse. Restricting trade is what they're saying. Restricting trade made things worse. It's better to trade and sell things between countries. After World War II, 1939 to 1945, countries began to trade more freely with each other. They made trade agreements like the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, which has been replaced by the World Trade Organization, WTO. The loosening of trade barriers helped many countries become richer, including Canada. Also, oil was discovered in Alberta in 1947. The discovery of oil made Canada an important energy producer. Oil, natural gas, agriculture, and other natural resources have helped make Canada a wealthy country with a high standard of living. Between 1945 and 1970, Canada traded more and more with the United States and with other countries around the world. Today, the United States is still our most important trading partner, but Canada is always working hard to develop stronger trade relationships with other countries. As Canada became richer, our governments were able to support many important social assistance programs. The Canada Health Act gives all Canadians good quality health care in every province and territory. Unemployment insurance, now called employment insurance, or EI, was introduced by the federal government in 1940. Pension and old age security plans were introduced in 1927, and the Canadian Pension Plan, the CPP, was fully implemented in 1965. Quebec has its own pension plan. Free public education is provided by the provinces and territories. Canada and the world. Canada gained full independence from Great Britain slowly and gradually. Canada participated in World War I, 1914 to 1918, but Canada was automatically at war with Germany when England declared war. This was because Canada did not have full control of its own foreign affairs. By 1939, when World War II began, Canada did have full control and was not automatically at war along with Great Britain. In fact, Canada declared war on Germany 1 week after England and France did. After World War II, the map of the world changed. Germany, Japan, and Italy were defeated, but there was a new threat. This threat was communism. Under the dictator Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union moved into Eastern Europe, and Western democratic countries were worried about the spread of communism. They were also worried about another world war. The period from 1945 to 1989 is called the Cold War. Western democracies, especially the United States, tried to contain the Soviet Union and stop the spread of communism across the world. They fought similar wars, like the Korean War. Canada participated in this war. and the Vietnam War. Canada did not fight in this one. They were also involved in a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union. Canada joined with the United States and other Western democratic countries in Europe to form the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, a military alliance to defend against the Soviet Union. Canada also joined the United States to create the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, to protect North America from Soviet attack. Attack from the air. Canada is a member of the United Nations, the UN, and has been since the UN began in 1945. Canada participated in the UN operation to defend South Korea during the Korean War, which was in 1950 to 1953. In 1956, Lester Pearson, a future Prime Minister of Canada, introduced the idea of a United Nations peacekeeping force during a crisis in the Middle East. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work, and since then, Canada has taken part in many UN peacekeeping missions around the world. Canada has also participated in UN-sanctioned armed conflicts in countries like the former Yugoslavia and Afghanistan. Canada and Quebec. After World War II, French-Canadian society and culture flourished in Quebec. Quebec experienced a period of great change and progress during the 1960s. Before the 1960s, Quebec had been a province that was controlled by a powerful premier and the Roman Catholic Church. The Quebec premier and the church wanted the people to keep their traditional values and their unique culture. They did not encourage education or interaction with the rest of Canada. In the 1960s, Quebec modernized and became a confident and prosperous province. Quebec began to challenge the rest of Canada. This movement is called the Quiet Revolution. Some Quebecers wanted to separate from Canada. They wanted to create an independent, French-speaking country where Quebecers could be masters of our own house. They did not feel that English-speaking Canadians respected their culture or their important place in the founding of Canada. The federal government wanted to make French Quebecers, the Québécois, feel more at home in Canada. So in 1963, the federal government called the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism. This led to the Official Languages Act of 1969, which guarantees services in French and English in all federal government offices across Canada. In 1970, Canada helped found La Francophonie, an international association of French-speaking countries. Quebec and New Brunswick are members of La Francophonie. In 2006, the Government of Canada declared that the Québécois form a nation within a united Canada. Aboriginal Canadians also feel that they should be given recognition as nations. So far, this has not happened. The movement for Quebec sovereignty grew during the 1970s. There was a referendum, a vote, by the people of Quebec in 1980 to decide whether Quebec would remain part of Canada or become a sovereign nation. These people, or the people of Quebec, said no. There was another referendum in 1995, and once again, the majority of the people said no to independence. Both votes were very close. So Quebec's place in Canada is still a passionate topic of discussion for all Canadians. Another important event happened in the 1980s. In 1982, the Constitution of Canada was patriated. And patriated means that our Constitution is in Canada and we have full control over our own Constitution. Since 1867, Canada had been governed by the British North America Act, the BNA, an act of the British Parliament. The original act did not give Canada total control of its own affairs. Some things still had to be approved by the British Parliament. One example was the right to declare war independently, World War I. Many changes were made over the years as the country became more independent, but Canada still did not have the right to make changes to its own constitution. Finally, in 1982, the government decided it was time to bring the Constitution home and to become fully independent as a nation. The Constitution Act of 1982 also saw the addition of the, and then we go to page 49, the addition of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which protects the fundamental rights of all Canadians. However, there were problems with the negotiations of the new Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. At the time, Quebec had a separatist provincial government. Because the government of Quebec was interested in moving Quebec towards independence from Canada, it did not want to sign on to a new Canadian Constitution that would bind Quebec closer to Canada. No agreement was reached with Quebec, and Quebec still refuses to sign on. You can see in the image that I've inserted into this page that Quebec is actually a very large province, reaching up and along the eastern coast of Hudson Bay. And so you can see how it could become its own country, and that is the desire of many people living in Quebec, especially the French-speaking. A changing society. Since the 1960s, Canadian society has become more flexible and open. In part, this is because Canadians have become better educated. In the 1960s, colleges and universities were built all over the country, and many Canadians took advantage of new educational opportunities. Today, most Canadians have post-secondary qualifications from universities, colleges, or trades. Also, more and more women entered the workforce in the 1960s and 70s. This also led to changes in society because the role of women changed. Old prejudices were breaking down. In the past, some groups, including women and Canadians of Asian and Aboriginal descent, were not allowed to vote in federal and provincial elections. Today, every Canadian citizen over the age of, your text says 18, but in the last election it was changed to even lower, to 16. So today, every Canadian citizen over the age of 16 is encouraged to vote. Another factor that changed Canadian society was a change in the immigration policy. It is often said that Canada is a country of immigrants. Before the 1960s, however, most immigrants came from Europe. More recently, Canada has welcomed immigrants and refugees from all over the world, and Canada has embraced multiculturalism. Multiculturalism means we welcome immigrants from many cultures, and we value the cultural contributions of all citizens. At least 1/3 of Canadians can trace their origins to countries other than Great Britain and France. Today, this rich diversity of cultures is most evident in our cities. And that's the end of our reading for this section, but we're going to also go on to part 2. But we have several questions that you can study to make sure you understand this part 1.